So currently they are up at the rooms in St. John's. They're only up for a couple more days, though. It closes on November 1st. And so we thought today that we would do a little session on how I draw them. I fully encourage questions, comments, anything. I have a screen open beside me where I can read all of your comments and questions along the way. I know that a few people mentioned that they wanted to follow along with what I was doing. So there have been some images provided, and I'm sure that if you wanted to follow along but you don't have the image yet, you can send a comment on here with your email address, and Whitney will be able to email you that image right away. So without further ado, we can get started. I'll just say what I'm doing, and if you have questions, like I said, just put them in the chat and I will answer them. So today we're going to be drawing visual artist Kim Greeley. Kim is based out of St. John's and is a painter and printmaker. I believe that's primarily what she does. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but with gorgeous paintings that you've probably seen of views from the Trans-Canada Highway in really lovely kind of color-blocked sections. They're beautiful. So we're going to start with painting Kim today. So I guess drawing would get the framework done. So I'm going to walk everybody through how I use a simplified grid system to create the face easily. So I start with figuring out where I'm going to want it on the page. So that means starting the drawing from top to finish from the line in the center. So I like to keep mine not huge, but large enough on the page. I'm going to try drawing a little darker than I normally do. Typically, I would draw a lot lighter than this. However, for everyone to be able to see it, we're going to be drawing a bit darker. So I would recommend drawing lightly on your page. I like to make a mark for the top and a mark for the bottom here. And then I mark the halfway point. This is an important mark. This is going to be designating where the eyes are on the portrait. And it's important to be accurate in this phase. Like I see that right now. I actually probably put it up a little high. So I'm going to change that. And just a note too, I'm using just Canson XL watercolor paper. It's one of the more inexpensive watercolor papers I've found, but fantastic for just kind of everyday use. Next, I'm going to go across the face here, and I'm going to add in the line for the eyes. Eyes belong halfway down the head, not up on the forehead. We get a lot of people putting eyes up here, thinking they're at the top of the head. Next, what I'm going to look at, I'm looking at my image right now, and I'm comparing the width of the face from the middle of the face to the side to how tall the head is. And when I'm looking at my image, I can see that it's just a little over half this size. So I'm going to just make it that wide. We can adjust later if we need to, but I'm just kind of doing a guesstimation right now, like a measured guesstimation. For anyone who is new to following, please feel free to write any questions or comments in the section, and I can answer your questions too. All right, the next line that I'm going to look at is the line for the nose. So when I'm looking at my image, the nose sits a little over halfway up from between the eye line and the chin line. And then I'm going to make that same guesstimation for where the mouth sits. The mouth looks like it's about a third of the way down from the nose right here. The next thing we're going to look at is the width of the eyes to really determine how wide the head is. So in order to do that, I'm going to look at the space between the eyes and between the nose and between the eyes and the sides of the face. And I can determine that's about equal. Kim has mostly even 5 eyes wide head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make some marks here to designate the eyes and divide this line into 5 relatively equal sections. I like to erase any little mistakes at this point because it's nice to just have an accurate framework to go off of. Okay, this creates the framework that we use for creating our portrait. This is a really quick way of getting a portrait down and being a little accurate about it so that you're going for likeness specifically. Okay, so just going to keep an eye on the time. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to start with the eyes. That's kind of where I like to start. I like to kind of anchor in my drawing a bit with something that isn't going to change, especially too because sometimes I use eyes as a unit for measurement. So I'm just going to zoom in on my image for a second here. So you may notice that this image probably isn't the clearest image. One of the kind of things that I do with my pandemic portraits is I ask people to send me kind of what I call their pandemic state. So when I ask them, I just ask them to take a photo or take a selfie right away of just however they are in that moment, and that's what I want to see in the photo. So sometimes they are a little grainier, sometimes they're not lit really properly, and I try to work with the photo every time instead of looking for a perfect photo. So I'm going to start with the eyes. I'm not going to draw little almond eyes because that is not what Kim has. So I'm going to start by drawing this kind of area that houses the carnuncula here. Come up, and it looks like it kind of dips down a bit from there and joins over here just slightly above half. And I know that's not a huge amount of space right here, but when you're dealing with such a tiny drawing, any little bit of space really matters. We're going to do the bottom, and it kind of dips down a bit under that halfway line and comes back up. So that's one of the eyes. So now we'll get in the second one. There, it's relatively flat over the top and then comes back down. At this point too, it's nice because you can kind of see the face taking shape, and you'll know if any of your measurements are a little off because things will just look a little off. Okay, there. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to place where the pupil and the iris is. I'm trying my best to keep my hand kind of off to the side, but I'll try and take a look at that every once in a while. And you can feel free to ask me questions about what I'm doing, or you can ask questions about pandemic portraits in general, or even my practice in general, anything you would like to, really. Okay. And we're going to get that pupil in there. Pupils are always on the inside, right in the middle of your iris. So make sure that it is placed in the middle. Again, this side, placing in the iris. And I am drawing a circle, just leaving out the top and bottom because the lids are going to sit over top. And again, add in that pupil. Just like that. All right. So the next point that I like to put in is that little pink part on the inside of the eyes. Place in where that's going to go. And now I like to include the hood of the eyes because, as we know, the eyes are in an eye socket, and we really want to make sure that it looks like they are underneath. So putting in that hood helps that. We'll do the same thing on the other. You'll also notice that I kind of work back and forth between the two eyes. I don't like to just finish one and then move on to the other. I like to work between the two, and that's because if I make a bit of a mistake, then I don't have one eye all the way done, and I can return back to it, and it doesn't feel like I'm erasing a ton of work. All right. And then I like to add in kind of the bit of the socket that sits underneath as well. Just put that in there lightly. I don't put in a whole lot of information, just enough that I'll understand it later. Okay, so we have our eyes in there. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to get the glasses kind of started. I won't fully finish them because I'll need the nose to fully finish them, but I want to get them in so I know that everything is kind of lined up in the same place. So the first part that I look at is how high are the glasses sitting above this middle eye line. So for Kim's glasses, they are sitting kind of just higher or just kind of in line with where the line that we made for the eye socket is. So that's the bottom of the inside of the glasses right there. And we can see that it kind of sits in the middle. And then just going to add on the top. And again, it's important to pay attention to where this is because I think that everyone wants to draw this section of the glasses right down in between the eyes, but that's not quite where it is in this case. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assess the amount of space between the inside of the eye and where the glasses should sit. For anyone who's following along and cursing my name because I decided to include glasses in this pandemic portrait, I apologize. Glasses are kind of one of those things, though, where I like to draw them because I feel like every pair that I draw, I get a little bit better at making sure that they're symmetrical. So right now, I'm drawing the inside of the glasses, of the rim. And I kind of jump between working on the inside and the outside, depending on where I am on the image. Kendall said, I don't know if this is where you ask questions, but how do you pick which people to draw? That's a great question, and yes, it is where you ask questions, Kendall. So that's a great question. When I started this series, I started it with a self-portrait, actually. And that was mostly because during the pandemic, I had myself around me, myself and my partner, and that was it. And I wanted to start with a portrait of myself just because I find self-portraits challenging but also relaxing. So I started by drawing myself, and once that kind of went well, then I drew my partner, and then I drew my friend, and then I started to realize that I was drawing portraits of arts-related folks in Newfoundland. So I mean, honestly, I kind of started with drawing my friends and people that I knew because it's a lot easier to say, hey, can I paint you for something to those people? And then past that, then I started kind of just reaching out to folks who I knew who were artists in Newfoundland who maybe I didn't perhaps already know, and told them about the project. I just gave them some context about what I was doing and why I was doing it, and for I think everybody that I asked actually agreed and was excited to work in this project. So that was good. That was great. So right now, I kind of have a backlog of people who I have to get around to drawing. They've been piling up since online teaching started, and I look forward to kind of slowly picking at them, and in December being able to get back into creating them. I mean, it'd be nice if we weren't still in a pandemic then, but I think that we will be, so I'll just keep working on them as I go. Does that answer your question, Kendall? So I have just been working on these glasses as I've been chatting about this. I find glasses are one of the things that will take the longest in this, and I will have to go back and adjust them a bunch of times. Because the thing about faces is that faces aren't symmetrical, and because of that, I find that glasses tend to throw me off a bit with them because glasses are symmetrical. So I find myself going back and adjusting and making it perfect. Jean, hi, will this video be available to view again later? Yes, it will. Whitney told me that she's going to be posting it to the Facebook page after it's done. So depending on when you go to look at it, it might be a little bit deeper in their content, but yes, it should be up there. Same with the painting one. We'll make sure that we put that video up as well so you can return to it. It's kind of like a nice demo video where if you just want a little refresher on on drawing people, or perhaps I know that this is kind of a different method than some people use, this kind of like adjusted grid method. So if you struggle with doing portraiture, this might be a method that you find you like. This was something that I wasn't even really using, to be honest, before these pandemic portraits. This is something that I kind of came up with as I was doing them because I needed a quick way to get these done. I didn't want to spend forever mapping a portrait out. So I kind of came up with this. And it just evolved, and at first there were far more lines involved, and now I'm in a place where there are not many lines involved, and I'm a little happier with it. Okay, so now that these glasses are on here, I'm gonna find out where the brows hit, just in relation to where they are under the glasses and above the glasses. So some of the eyebrow, because of Kim's prescription, is going to sit inside the frame of the glasses, and some of it is going to sit outside of the frame of the glasses. Another thing that I do is that I use plumb lines a lot. So the plumb line is a vertical line that goes down from the top of the face to the bottom and is always hanging down straight. So I use plumb lines to kind of determine where things line up. So for example, if I'm looking at the edge of the eyebrow and I want to know where it lines up on the face, I look at my photo and I draw on my photo an imaginary line that goes down from the top of the eyebrow straight down, and I find in the photo it lines up with the inner part of the eye, so that is where the end of the eyebrow is, in the inner part of the eye. And that just helps you do a little extra measuring. So that's nice. There. Add in this one. This is mostly on the inside. A common misconception I find is that people think eyebrows are outside of glasses, so that's where I will draw them every single time. But sometimes they're on the inside, sometimes they're on the outside, sometimes they are a half and half combo. And where you place them is going to affect the likeness a lot. I like to also just kind of place in lines where bold shadows are going to be. So there is a very bold shadow right here between the brow and the glasses. Again, for those people who have joined, you can feel free to ask questions about the process, about pandemic portraits in general, about my practice in general, and I will try my best to answer all of your questions. Okay, so from here we're going to move on to the nose. So this line that I drew for the nose here, this is not where, you know, kind of that circular part of the ball of the nose hits. Rather, this is going to be where the very bottom of the nose for what we see is. So when I'm looking at this image of Kim right now, the bottom part that I see is actually the ridge underneath the nose, and the ball of the nose sits a lot higher. So I'm gonna start by putting in kind of an approximation of where I think the ball of the nose sits, that round part. Oh, I got one little lone heart up going up the screen. That was sweet. I like that. There, so that's kind of an approximation of where the ball of the nose is. And that ridge of the nose that we were talking about in between the nostrils sits down here, and I find that it's not perfectly in center. There's a little bit more of the nose on this side than there is on this side, so I'm gonna make sure that I account for that. So now I'm going to travel up here, find that kind of bottom of the nose. So now that I have it kind of established that that is where the ridge of the nose is sitting, now I want to look at how wide the nose is. We know now where it goes down to, but we want to know how wide it is. So I'm going to do exactly what I said before, and I'm going to use that plumb line situation. And I can see from my photo that just in the inner part of the eye is how wide the nose is on this side. And on the other side, again, it kind of lines up with that inner part of the cornicula there, the pink part. So I'm just gonna draw two little guidelines down here so I can see for myself how wide the nose is. So now we've got this nice, neat little box that the nose is gonna fit within. So I can start by adding on the nostrils, which don't go quite to the bottom of the ridge of the nose on this picture of Kim. So I'm just gonna come up here and they kind of hit about halfway through the ball. Now, the other thing to note when you're looking at your image is how much space is between your glasses and the nose. Right now, it's looking like a bit too much. So I kind of have to look at this and determine, okay, so did I make the glasses have too much of an angle this way, or is my nose too low? And I think in this case, I have messed up the glasses a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just reassess. I can see that this needs to come down a bit more to there, and then it rounds out. So I'm going to adjust in both places. And then, like I said, since it is such a careful drawing, I'm gonna make sure that I go back in here with the eraser and just erase that a bit so I can see it. Okay, good. So again, just gonna make sure my nostrils are in the right place. Same with this side. That one's gonna sit about here and go up to about there. Okay. And add those in. I don't like to add any necessarily dark spots where the image is dark because I don't want it to be dark when I put my watercolors over it after. So what I do instead is I just kind of create lines where the shadows are. So now I'm gonna look up here at the nose, and I'm actually going to erase a couple of my guidelines here because I don't need them anymore, because I want to include that there is going to be a pretty hard shadow that goes on her nose right there. And then for the bridge of the nose, there's not really any strong shadows anywhere, so I don't need to include them, but instead there are going to be strong shadows that sit underneath the glasses here. So I want to make sure that I remember those, because those will determine how the cheeks look with how those shadows are. There. And then same with the nose. I can see that there's kind of a hard shadow that sits about here and comes around over there. And then for the most part, there's a lot of highlights to Kim's nose. So I'm probably just going to leave it as such. I do think I've drawn her one nostril a little too high, so I am going to go back in and just adjust. And then that one's probably a little low. Okay, so that's better. Cool. Now we're gonna go on to the kind of under part of the nose. I'm going to erase my guideline again because I don't need this guideline right here. And I'm gonna start by taking a look at the space and evaluate the space between the nose and the mouth and just see if I still feel that that's where it's going to be. I feel pretty good about it, so I'm just going to continue on. And I'm going to start by drawing that kind of center crease of the mouth right there. And then again, I'm just gonna kind of look and be like, yeah, that looks about the right spot. Next, I'm gonna look at the plumb lines, and I'm going to put in where the corners of the mouth are going to hit so I know how wide the eye is. And if I draw a line down, or sorry, up, I guess, from the mouth, it hits the pupil, like the outside of the pupil. So I'm going to draw a little line here. I'm not completely in front of my drawing, so that might be a little bit off. We'll see. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side, which is kind of just on the inside of the eye in this case. So now I have my two lines designating how wide the mouth should be. So I can draw that line in between the two lips and draw it out to there. And that is the inside of the mouth. So after that point, we want to go through and add in the lips. So I personally like to start with the top lip. No real reasons, just personal preference, I guess. And again, for anyone who's just joining, please feel free to ask any questions you'd like about practice, about myself, about pandemic portraits. If you happen to be located in St. John's too, I will be in St. John's tomorrow for the Artist Spotlight at the Rooms, where I'll be working on a pandemic portrait there as well. I'm just going to erase this little line that happened down here and go back in with the bottom lip. I like to kind of start in the center because I like to judge the width of the lips from the center. And you can see that with Kim's lips, they're basically the same width. So we will add that in similarly. There, and then the other thing that I like to put in now at this point is kind of the creases and the shadows that are created on the outside of the lips, right there. All right, so I'm also going to go in right now and I'm going to add in this shadow that sits underneath the nose and it kind of ends right below, right above the lip, like that. And then any really strong shadows that are emerging from the nostrils. So there is a rather harsh shadow that sits right beside the right nostril. And on the left, it's not as strong, but it does kind of create a shadow on the cheek right here. So I'm just going to draw a line in there so I remember. Okay, so at this point then, I'm going to take a look at the chin. And again, there is a harder shadow that kind of comes out right underneath and is kind of on like a little semicircle under the lip. And then the chin sits immediately underneath that, right there. So you can kind of see how that chin starts to build up. Okay, just gonna zoom out on my image here a little bit. So the next step is that we're going to draw in the jaw, and I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. Drawing in the jaw is probably my least favorite part. It does take me a bit of a long time to do that because I find that it needs adjusting and readjusting as jaws do. So that might take us a second. I like to start by looking and assessing the angles in my image. And I can see on my image that there's going to be a relatively straight line coming down from the side. There's going to be a second angle that joins the cheek to the jaw. And then there's almost like a separation between that angle and where the chin starts. So we're going to have to include that. But that separation does not happen on the right side. So there's going to be a difference between the left and the right, and that'll be important for how the neck connects to the head later. So I like to start, like I said, with the chin, and just getting kind of that rounded bit in between. And this can be adjusted later if it's not in the right spot. These shadows are all of a sudden going to become very important too, because I find that areas will line up with that. So we're going to start with this. And at first, I just find I do a bit of a guesstimation drawing almost. So I guesstimate where, based on the angles and where things are lining up, that the jaw is going to go. I already can see that this is going to be a bit wide, but we'll just kind of start with that. And then up at the top of the head, you can see that it comes in and gets more narrow, like that. So there, and there's going to be a good shadow that happens on the chin here. And it kind of comes concave the other way. There. And now I'm going to do the same thing on this side, where I can see that the face kind of starts about there on the glasses. Cheek comes in a bit, comes back out at the jawline, and comes down. So I'm gonna work on the chin part. It's gonna come up to about here, and then that's kind of where it connects. So I can see that, again, I'm a bit wide. Part of this is, again, because I'm sitting off to the side of my drawing so that all y'all at home can see. But there. So now I'm just going to start adjusting. Like I can see that this needs to come in a bit because Kim has a narrow face. And I'm also, just because I want to visualize it, Kim has nice rosy cheeks, and I would like to kind of visualize where they are going to be sitting. So I'm just going to draw in this kind of triangle for the cheek. And on this side, I'm going to put in that semblance of the cheek as well, again, because I want to see it, I want to visualize it. There. And down here. And there. I would do some of these drawings live on my Instagram over the pandemic too. And that I found was nice because it was a way to connect with people that I hadn't really been able to connect with because of the pandemic. But I was able to sit and chat, and people either asked questions that had to do with the drawings, or they just kind of sat along with it and just were along for the ride. I had some people say that it's just really even relaxing to sit and watch a portrait being drawn and just to watch it unfold. And I thought that was a really nice sentiment, especially when we're all so kind of stressed out about the pandemic. It's nice to have an opportunity to just sit and enjoy watching something. That's probably how Bob Ross got his popularity. Relaxing fella to listen to. Okay. So I think that we'll probably adjust this jaw a little bit more, but I think that for our purposes, we can probably move on. What I want to actually adjust a little bit more so, I'm just going to do a quick rearrangement of some of the images on my computer here, just so I can see it a little bit better. There we go, okay. That's easier. There we go, that's better. I was telling Whitney earlier that this is the first time I've sat in a public place without having a mask on in ages, very long time. It's been nice. There, I'm going to erase this little line in the middle in there too. Okay, so now what I'm going to look at is the hair up at the top. So with this line here, actually I didn't really pay attention to where that was going to be. Let me take a look at that. Right, so I drew the hair up, drew the line up to the top of the hair. So I know already about where Kim's curls are all going to end. So that makes it nice and easy. So I am going to start, I can see that they kind of like start halfway through the glasses here, and there's going to be some little curly parts, and that the hairline probably ends about here. So I'm just going to make a mark there. And then I'm going to come over to this other side, and I can see that the curls kind of end about here on the glasses. So again, just going to do some guesstimating. And the line that comes up to the top of the head kind of runs into the curls a little bit, and then the hairline starts over here. So we kind of have the top of the head sitting here. There, and that's where all of her curls are going to kind of run into. I'm just going to redefine this a little bit. Okay. And then I'm going to look at the hairline and see that there is a bunch of curls here. So the way I'm going to draw the hair is that I'm going to draw it in anticipation of watercoloring it. So what that means is I am going to draw it in the sections that I see, because I find that watercoloring hair by drawing in sections is a lot easier to determine, I guess, the correct flow and placement. So first of all, let's erase this little line in the middle now because we do not need it there anymore. So that's where the part is. That looks about correct. Okay. I lied. Maybe we should start by putting the neck in a bit first. Let's get that in because that'll determine where our hair is going to sit down. So I'm going to look at where the neck lines up with the chin here. I'm looking at all my different kind of sections that I've drawn. This is where it takes a sharp turn, and the neck kind of comes right after that. And I'm going to take a look on this side as well and see that it starts about just slightly to the left of where the two areas of the chin are, or the jawline, I should say. And then we're going to just come down and complete the collar, which takes a bit of a dip. And it's a button-up collar, which means that it has a middle to it. The middle of the collar is about here. I'm just going to account for that right there. There, and that's going to kind of be where the neckline is. I love painting and drawing collared shirts. I don't know why. I think it's because they get really nice little shadows and stuff underneath them, so they're easy. They just they sit very nicely in a drawing. There's going to be a nice fold here, and it's kind of it's not a pointed tip on her collar, but it's not rounded either. Kind of sitting in between. There. And the other side. And bring that down. And again, kind of pointed, kind of rounded. And then there's going to be a button. Sits about there. And the seam for the shirt. Now, this image doesn't go much further past this, but I'm going to want this to come down a bit further because I just want the image to kind of have a more triangular shape at the bottom. So I already know that I'm going to kind of just extend this, not by a lot, and maybe I will force in another button right there because I can just copy the button above it. Okay, that's good. I'm just kind of looking at my drawing overall right now, and I can see already that I've made this hood a little high, so I'm just gonna bring it down a little bit. I like the look of that better. Erase that. I've been using a kneadable eraser along with a retractable hard eraser. And I've just been using an HB pencil. Typically, I would actually be using not an HB, but just an H pencil. I find that it watercolor works really well over top of it, but I wanted to use an HB so it was a little bit easier to see. Okay, let's return to these curls down here. So I'm going to start with figuring out where they kind of end at the bottom, and Kim has shorter hair, so you can see that that's kind of where they end. So I'm going to just draw it in blocks. Like I can see that there's a curl that comes down here, like that. There's going to be a curl that flips out there. And I'm not putting in too much detail, just enough for myself to understand what's going on. So there's going to be a curl that kind of comes out like this, around where the glasses are, and it then turns and comes and kind of kisses the side of the face right there. And then I'm also open to if anyone wants any tips or tricks, or for me to re-explain something or explain how I would do something else. I can totally help out with that too. There, and I think I have made Kim's forehead a little on the large side. Just shorten that down a little bit. I'm going to draw this one, comes down into here. This one hops over. There is a strong curl right there that I want to include. Then on this side, again, like I like to start with kind of like anchoring curls so I know where things sit. So there's this one anchoring curl that's happening that's flying kind of off her face. Drawing curls is kind of like drawing ribbons. How you have like the folds and they go back on themselves. Natural curls anyway. Then there's this bit of hair that's gonna come down. A lot of this too, like I don't wanna overdraw it because I want the watercolor to kind of do its thing after. I don't wanna be like restricted by my drawing or have too many lines in my drawing for after. This piece is kind of rogue and comes down there. That'll come down there. And then this piece come down here. And again, we have another rogue curl happening. I'm also looking at like where along the face these curls are going down to. So like I know that this one comes down to just below the glasses. So I'm just mapping that in for myself for later. Like that. And then there's gonna be this little guy that does this. And again, I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna say, okay, where does the hair end? Just about there. I can see that this is a big block here, and then there's a big kind of curl that does that. And another section that comes down here. So we kind of have Kim's hair put in place there. The next thing I'm gonna do is establish where the shoulders are. And again, I'm gonna have to do some sort of made up sections here. Another good thing to note with the hair is that especially when you're using watercolor and you're using it over top of pencil areas, I always err on the side of smaller hair rather than larger hair because I don't want to see the outlines from my pencils as a shadow after when I put in the paint. I would rather bring everything a little closer towards the face and then exaggerate it out with the watercolor a little bit after. That's going to make it so we don't see pencil lines. So for the shoulders, I can see that it kind of lines up with, on this side anyway, with where the hair hits up here. So I'm gonna draw in the shoulder, I'm gonna draw in the folds of the shirt that Kim is wearing, and then I'm just gonna go in and I'm gonna draw any kind of major folds or wrinkles in it, or seams. Seams are always coming into play. This one kind of comes down to there. And then there's going to be a bit of it there. I find that I have a tendency to make shoulders a bit wider, so I always have to rein it back in after. And then on this side, I can see that it lines up kind of in the crease here. So I'm just going to draw that in. And I think that's really most of the information that we are going to need for the shirt. Not going to need a lot. There's going to be a wrinkle here and here, but especially where the shirt is white, I really don't want to do too many lines. I want to be able to have white on the shirt if I need it there. Then I'm going to look at the neck and I'm going to see if there's any particular things that need to be drawn in. Like for example, there is a rather hard shadow that comes down, and it comes down from this side as well and just kind of tucks in, being cast from Kim's chin. And then at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the drawing and just make sure that everything is where I want it to be. So I've been noticing as I've been working on this that I do think that the eye sat a little bit low on this side, so I just want to tuck it back up. This is kind of in like the polishing phase, and depending on who I'm drawing and what portrait I'm working on, this phase can be really short or this phase can be really long. It depends on how well the drawing goes first. I have had I'm surprised this question actually didn't come up because it's usually asked anytime I do anything like this, but usually people ask, have you had any that just don't work? And the answer to that is yes and no. I'm going to, because I've already talked to her about this, I'm going to use this as an example because I know she doesn't mind, but I was drawing Emily Pittman as one of the pandemic portraits, a painter out in, and I guess installation artist out in St. John's. And I I drew her, I tried drawing her the first time, it wasn't working, I erased it all. I tried drawing her a second time, and it wasn't working, and I erased it all and switched papers because I just found I ruined the sheet of paper that I was working on. I tried drawing her a third time on a new sheet of paper, and it was just going absolutely awful. There's something about just, I don't know if it was the day or if it was the image or the lighting conditions, or maybe because it wasn't like super crisp, or actually no, Emily's was really crisp. So maybe I was like thinking, oh, I have all this information, I can do such a good job with details, and it just was not working. And I finally messaged Emily and I was like, look, like this has nothing to do with you. This all has to do with the mood that I'm in right now, but this drawing just is not happening for me. It's not working. I need another image of you. And luckily it was Emily, who is very, very sweet. And she just said, she's like, no, don't worry. I understand. Like for me, when I'm painting, some houses just don't want to be painted. It just isn't working. So she sent me over another photo and it worked so much better on the next photo. It looked a million times better. So thank you, Emily, for showing that patience for me. That was very important for me on that day. This one seems to be working out pretty well, actually. Kim took a really good photo for this, too. I think that she included some really good lighting conditions, like very interesting lighting conditions. So right now I'm just kind of going through and I think that I made her face slightly wide, so I'm just like slimming it up a little bit. Who am I drawing now? So great question. This is Kim Greeley. I mentioned that at the beginning of it. She is a painter and printmaker out of St. John's. But one of the fun things that I have been doing is like even just like getting to know a little bit the artists that I'm painting, the ones who I knew of but didn't know very well, especially from being relatively newer to the art scene in Newfoundland and Labrador. So that's been great. I definitely have had a lot of interest in being in the pandemic portraits too, which has been really nice. Some people just kind of offer up their images, or what I like even more, and actually what I haven't talked about yet, is the statements. Along with every one of the images comes a statement. What I did was, something I was thinking about in the beginning of the pandemic was about our productivity and what it means to be productive when all of a sudden our work and home lives are just blurred and we are mixing all of it. And I found for myself, and I still find, to be honest, that the lines between being productive and relaxing are just completely blurred for me. So I started kind of thinking about that, especially in the beginning of the pandemic when I just felt like I wasn't getting anything done. And when I did my first self-portrait, I titled it, and on whatever day, I think it was like April 14th, like on April 14th, my flat iron broke. And this was just like a moment of significance for me in the pandemic because I have really wild and unruly hair if I don't use heat on it. And when it broke, it just like, not only did it just feel like, oh good, one more thing, my flat iron broke, now I'm gonna have to shell out a bunch of money to replace it in a time when I don't know if I'm gonna be working again or not soon. And then also I just felt when I looked at myself in the mirror, I wasn't looking at what I was used to because my hair was just wild and I didn't feel put together, and that added to that feeling of unproductivity. So that was just like a really significant moment to me during the pandemic. And so I started asking other people about what was significant in the pandemic for them. And I love the range of things that I've gotten from people, from monumental things like Jordan Bennett having his first child, which was super exciting. He was also the only pandemic portrait to include the head of a baby anyway, a little implied baby. And that ranged from that to Melissa Tremblay, who told me that she was organizing her tote bags, and that was something significant that she recalls doing in the pandemic. So I really love the mixture of what people thought of as significant, because I really didn't give guidelines on what significant had to mean to, like, what it had to be. Like, it could be something something important, something not important at all. It can have context, or it can be completely out of context for me. It didn't really matter. It just had to be significant in their eyes. So I love the range that that gave it. And I see that we have, what do we have? We have about 7 minutes left. So if anyone does have any last minute questions that I can answer while we're just kind of tidying up this drawing, I would love to answer them for you. Or if you want to just even give me a conversation prompt, I can do that. Sitting in the gallery all by myself, and I feel like I'm talking to myself for the most part. Trying to think of something else to say. Can go off on so many stories. I think that Emily Pittman was definitely the most difficult pandemic portrait to draw, or to paint, I should say, because the drawing part actually wasn't. That was the difficult part. The painting part came together really, really well, and I was actually really pleased with how Emily's portrait turned out. It's probably up there in my favorites. Jordan Bennett's was a huge favorite too. That one, just as I was working on it, just every brushstroke just felt like it was coming together perfectly for some reason. I find sometimes they just do that. Sometimes they just go together and it's just working. And I don't think I have any necessarily like least favorite ones, but I can definitely see the difference between the ones in the beginning compared to the ones at the end. I've relearned, I think, a lot about watercolors in this time, which has been a really nice kind of familiarity to come back to. How long have I been doing portraits? That's a great question. So I love doing portraiture as early as I can remember. I think when I was younger, the idea of creating art and creating art to be realistic was something that just intrigued me so much, and how real could I get things. So I remember actually being, this is a very specific memory, but being in grade 8, and I was trying to draw a picture. I don't know if anyone remembers the TV show. It was like a sci-fi TV show called The Lost World, and I was trying to draw one of the main characters from that, and it was not going well, and I brought it to my grade 8 teacher, who happened to be an art teacher, and I said, I can't get this. What am I doing wrong? And she's like, you're trying to get to this level of realism that, like, I don't know if I can teach you. So the best thing that I can say to you is draw what you see and not what you think you see. And for some reason, those words just made so much sense to me, and something clicked. So I started kind of doing portraiture a little bit more there. played around with it in high school. I think a lot of my high school projects had to do with it. And then when I was in my undergrad, I stopped doing portraits for a bit because I had teachers who told me, no, like, art isn't that. You should be doing things abstractly. Forget about details and things like that. And so I stopped. And then I picked it back up when I had another teacher who said, what are you talking about? Why did people tell you that? That's terrible advice. So I started again. My master's was focused on doing 9-foot tall portraits, actually. And then after that, I kind of, again, just, it's an ebb and flow thing, I think, for me. And I stopped making a lot of portraits again. And so I re-returned now after maybe 6 or 7 years not doing a single portrait other than like class demos for how to do portraits for people. So it's been a while of doing portraiture, but I would say this is the first time doing small portraits in probably over a decade, I'd say. And Nicolette asked, did you expect this project to be in the rooms? No, not even a little bit, Nicolette. So how that happened was I really, really started these with the intent of not doing anything with them because they were for myself. They were a moment where I could sit kind of quietly for myself and just do something productive for myself. And then after I had done probably, I think 15 of them, the rooms put out their call for the Present Tense series, Making Art in a Global Pandemic. And I saw that and I decided to apply to it, but again, not really thinking much of it. It seemed like the call, they wanted more experimental or in progress things. But I applied to that, and the curator there, Darren, he reached out to me and said he was very interested in putting them up. So at that point, when he contacted me, I had 32, I think, and I told him I wanted to have 40 by the time that he made his selections on which ones were going in the exhibition. So I started pumping them out a little bit and doing like one a day very consistently. And yeah, so then he chose, there's 30 up at the rooms, so the ones that he wanted to include. But no, I really didn't have any plans for these whatsoever. They were just going to kind of sit there and be something that I did during the pandemic. But I'm really glad and feeling very fortunate that I had the opportunity to be able to put them up and to share them. It was very exciting. And I'm going to see them for the first time tomorrow. I haven't seen them up yet, so that will be a really, really exciting moment. I'm actually going to tuck down the shirt a bit. The more I look at it, I just feel like all of this needs to come down a little bit. Like that. All right. Well, we're in our last minute of our live session. So we, in that hour, got our portrait kind of ready to go. Currently, I know that you've been seeing it on an angle the whole time. I'm just going to move it up a little bit, and hopefully the light doesn't affect it too much so you can see it. So we have our image all ready to go for next week. You can join us next Thursday from 2 until 5 when I'm going to be bringing my watercolors with me, and we are going to watercolor this portrait. If you want to watercolor along with me, you can still ask Whitney for the image. You can create this drawing and then watercolor it along with me, or if you just want to sit and watercolor yourself or sit and ask questions, then you can totally feel free to. Thank you so much for joining in, everyone. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see some of you again next week. Thank you so much.